Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into one of the most astonishing acts of collective sacrifice in modern economic history. Just imagine for a second that your country is on the brink of absolute financial ruin. The economy is collapsing, and the only way out? Opening your own jewelry box and giving away your most prized possessions. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened in South Korea during the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and 1998.
And you know who really set the tone for the entire country? It was the nation's first Catholic cardinal, Stephen Kim Soo-hwan. When the call went out to save the nation, he didn't just offer his prayers. He actually donated his own gold cross, the one given to him upon his appointment. He simply said, "Jesus gave his body. This is nothing." And wow, those words just echoed across the nation, sparking a movement unlike anything the modern financial world had ever seen. The sheer scale of the response, it was completely staggering. We're talking about 3.5 million ordinary people. To put that into perspective, that was roughly 1 in every 4 South Korean households at the time, all of them lining up in freezing weather outside banks and collection bins to just give away their personal treasures to save their country from bankruptcy. Together, this massive wave of citizens amassed an unbelievable 227 tons of gold. 227 tons! But to truly understand the gravity of this moment, to figure out exactly why newlyweds were literally throwing their wedding rings into collection bins, we have to pause and ask ourselves, how did it even come to this? How did an economic powerhouse suddenly find itself begging its citizens for their gold? Let's look at Section 1, Miracle to Meltdown, the Rise and Fall of the Chaebols.
So, to see how decades of rapid industrialization built a booming economy that was actually standing on a pretty fragile foundation, we've got to understand the chaebol. The word itself combines wealth and clan. After the Korean War, the government aggressively nurtured these huge family-owned business conglomerates. You definitely know the names today, brands like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. They were built up with special loans and protectionist policies to rebuild the shattered economy.
This era is often called the Miracle on the Han River, and it really was a miracle. Over just a few decades, South Korea transformed from a primarily agricultural society right into a technological powerhouse, starting with export-driven plans in the 60s to massive investments in the 70s. By the 1980s, thanks to super favorable global conditions, like low interest rates and cheap oil, exports absolutely exploded. Then, by the 1990s, financial redeculation meant these chaebols could borrow massive amounts of foreign capital to expand globally.
But here's the catch. That rapid growth created some really severe structural vulnerabilities. You had these overambitious conglomerates amassing billions in unpaid, short-term foreign debt. They were operating under this dangerous, too-big-to-fail mentality, basically assuming the government would always just bail them out. But when regional markets started to shake in the summer of 1997, man, the dominoes fell fast. Foreign investors panicked, capital fled the country, and the South Korean won plummeted.
That brings us to Section 2. The IMF era begins, a nation on the brink.
With the central bank just burning through its foreign reserves trying to defend the currency, South Korea was staring down the barrel of immediate default in December 1997. They had no choice. The government was forced to agree to a staggering $58 billion bailout from the International Monetary Fund. At the time, that was the largest financial rescue package in history. $58 billion.
But as you might guess, this lifeline came with a really heavy cost. The terms of this bailout were notoriously grueling. The IMF demanded radical structural reforms. Interest rates were hiked up to a punishing 30% just to stabilize the currency. Once invincible chaebols, companies like Hanbo Steel and Kia Motors, completely collapsed. The nation plunged into the painful IMF era, where citizens literally watched their hard-won economic miracle evaporate overnight, leading to soaring unemployment and homelessness.
Which leads us to Section 3, a history of sacrifice, the Korean instinct.
This was, without a doubt, a moment of profound national humiliation. But here's where it gets fascinating. This wasn't the first time the Korean people faced a crippling national debt. If we rewind 90 years earlier to 1907, Korea owed 13 million won to Japan. To stop their country from being annexed, everyday citizens started a grassroots movement. Men pledged to quit smoking for 3 months to donate the savings, while women formed jewelry abolition societies to give up their silver and gold. Fast forward to 1997, and we see that exact same civic spirit reemerging to tackle the IMF debt.
Just look at this quote. "Though my job is humble, my duty to the nation is the same as anyone's." That was from an anonymous beggar who donated during the 1907 campaign. And it just perfectly encapsulates that spirit. It shows that this idea of ordinary people stepping up to protect the nation, especially when their leaders falter, is a really powerful recurring theme in Korean history.
All right, on to Section 4. The 227-ton rescue, trading gold for the nation. So, diving back into 1998, let's see exactly how this modern incarnation of that spirit actually functioned in practice. Initiated by civic groups like the Sejmal Women's Association and amplified by major broadcasters, this wasn't just some simple charity drive. No, it was a highly strategic, patriotic currency exchange. Citizens brought in their personal gold items to banks, which were then melted down into ingots and sold on the international market for US dollars. Those much-needed dollars bolstered the national reserves, while donors received Korean won based on the current exchange rates. It was just a brilliant way to rapidly inject foreign capital back into the country.
But the sheer emotional weight of what was being sacrificed here really brings these massive macroeconomic numbers down to a deeply human scale. People weren't just handing over plain bullion. They were giving up memories. Newlyweds gave up their wedding bands. Parents donated dolbanji, those traditional 24-karat gold rings given to babies on their first birthdays. Even athletes handed over their Olympic medals, and families parted with precious generational heirlooms. It was a truly overwhelming display of a shared burden. Ultimately, all that gold collected was worth over $2.1 billion US dollars. Now, if you just look at the raw math, that physically covered only about 10% of the massive IMF loan. But its true value was far, far greater than just the sum of its parts.
Let's move to our final section, Section 5, Legacy of the Phoenix, Repayment and Resilience.
This unprecedented display of national solidarity did something incredible. It convinced the rest of the world that South Korea was a safe bet again. I mean, foreign creditors and the IMF literally watched a population willingly empty its own pockets to pay off the national debt. It signaled a level of symbolic unity, social cohesion, and sheer determination that instantly began restoring international market confidence.
And this had very real, tangible economic benefits. Because of the nation's unified response, along with sweeping structural reforms and labor adjustments, the IMF actually eased their repayment terms. South Korea ended up breaking free from the IMF era by repaying that massive loan in full by August 2001. That was an astonishing 3 years ahead of the required schedule, 3 years early.
Now, as we look back, it is absolutely vital to note a pretty harsh historical critique here. The citizens bore the financial and emotional burden, while many of the very corporations, those chaebols whose over-leveraged borrowing caused the crisis in the first place, often faced minimal consequences. A lot of everyday people literally paid the price while the big players got bailed out. But even with those very valid critiques, the campaign cemented a living legacy of civic unity. It proved that this kind of collective sacrifice is just baked into Korea's modern DNA. In fact, we saw this exact same spirit reawaken decades later during the COVID-19 pandemic. Citizens rapidly mobilized to donate masks, fundraise, and support frontline workers. It really stands out as a powerful template for community action in the face of disaster. So, looking at the immense personal sacrifices made by millions of ordinary South Koreans to save their nation, I want to leave you with a question. When the next crisis hits, what are you willing to give up for your community? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.